All right, Landon, hit the disclaimer.
Modulating pathways like dopamine and GABA in particular, as well as offsetting for some of the negative effects of cortisol and adrenaline at a receptor level. When you combine all of these things together, but you also prescribe or encourage, depending on the role of the practitioner, things like good diet, exercise, healthy sleep patterns, as well as the importance of building character, pushing outside the comfort zone. All of these things which we know are important for building optimal mental health. When people do these things with low testosterone, they often don't really work very well. But when we do it in conjunction with restoring the androgenic environment internally and neurologically, these outcomes tend to be drastically beneficial, especially when mapped out over a long period of time. And one of the things that I like the most about seeing men, intervene in their life with testosterone therapy is seeing where they end up in terms of how their trajectory changes and who they become and what they build for themselves over a prolonged period. And that's been the thing that's been the most exciting for me to see in practice.
Yeah, I have a ton of guys who, I think were just, high achieving as young adults and everything. And then just life kind of catches up with them, where they, developed a business or, got through all their schooling and now they've kind of somewhat made it, had a family, and then they kind of fall back, they loosen up, they gain some weight, their sleep goes off, especially if they have kids and everything. And then they're just kind of checking a little bit, but there's still that kind of high performing individual in the background. And they know they're just not who they once were. And, kind of, so that's where they want to be that high performing person. So they come and like, okay, well, maybe the testosterone will get me back on track. And I will say a lot of times it gives them their life force, their vigor back. I mean, there's guys that I have that were like, yeah, I started a business and like, I just kind of gave up on it, or I'm happy where I'm at. They get on testosterone and then they're like, man, I ramped up my marketing. I'm actively seeking leads, or, they'll come back and a guy will come back in 6 months like, hey, I got a promotion, or hey, I left that job. I started the business, so it gives them that, it kind of takes off the parking brake, and allows them to, drive at a full force and kind of lean forward the whole time. And so I've seen it be dramatic in getting their life force back and everything. And then you kind of talked about the masculinity, and that you have a big section over just the war on masculinity. And masculinity is positive overall, but, it's kind of the mantra, which I'm sure is kind of cliche now, but, it's be the warrior in the garden rather than the gardener in the war. But where does testosterone fit in this narrative with everything? Sorry, there's a big lead into a quick question, but how do you implement testosterone to get these guys their lives back and everything?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And when it comes to particularly speaking with younger men, and when I say what is young, it's basically anything that's a few years older than me, because I still deem myself as young regardless. But
Yeah.
when we're working with
Yeah.
men under the age of, let's say, 35, as a kind of ballpark, it can be very different for them versus working with older men, because when you're working with older men, let's say you've got a guy who's like in his 60s and he's got primary hypogonadism, and he wants to go back to feeling how he felt when he was 21. When you take these guys who are 30 who are hypogonadal, their worst nightmare is going back to how they felt when they were 21, because they've felt like garbage their entire adult life. And this is very different because it's kind of like they're going through a second puberty, or they're going through a complete puberty, because they're finally getting that androgenic surge that they haven't had yet and that they should have had. And this is very interesting in how it forms the psychology, because I believe, from what I've observed, and also, I guess, what you read about mechanistically, I mean, this hasn't really been looked at in particular in a lot of research, but when men lack that androgenic surge when they're younger, when they're supposed to be at the peak of their, testosterone levels, when we're looking at stereotypes of younger men, men who are like 18 to 25, it's men who are full of testosterone. They're hyper sex drive, and they're driven, and they're risk takers, and they're wanting to leave their mark on the world, and all these different things. That's not what men 20 to 25 are in this day and age at all. They are meek, they are afraid, they are avoidant, they are low confidence. And it's very clear to me that there is an endocrine factor to this. I mean, it's blatantly obvious. And I think once you're on the other side of optimizing your testosterone levels, you can see the forest. They say you can't see the forest from the trees. You can see the forest. You can really see and go, oh, this is a problem. And one of the examples I give all the time is that when I went to my 10-year high school reunion, I was looking at, I graduated in 2009, and I was looking at the graduating class is always the same age. So I was comparing, 2019 to 2009 to 1999 to 1989. In Australia, in Western Australia, when you graduate, you're 17 years old. The graduating class of 1989, if there was like a battle royale between them and the 2019 class, I would bet every single dollar to my name on 1989 to kick their asses. It was like looking at a completely different breed of human. And so when you're looking at that, it's pretty obvious, but you can see it drastically in culture that there's definitely a lifestyle component to it, for sure. We can't just blame, the pollutions, plastics, and pesticides for everything. There's definitely a lifestyle component to it, but there is also a endocrine disruption factor to it. And I think that this is much more prominent in Western countries than in places like Eastern Europe, for example, but it is everywhere. And when we're looking at what testosterone can do for these younger men, it basically gives them the biological foundation that they were supposed to have. And I think it can be very psychologically damaging for the self-esteem when you're a young man who's been low testosterone his whole life, and you get to 30 and 35, and because you've been avoidant, because you've been, less resilient to stress, because you've been less driven from an internal factor that you don't really know that that's what's going on, it can be pretty damaging when you kind of look at your life and realize that you could be better, and that you are behind the eight ball in terms of where you know that you could and should be. And it's not from a lack of trying and feeling like there's something wrong with you, but then you go to the doctor and you're told that everything is normal because you're in some ridiculous reference range, and you just simply need an antidepressant, and that's the solution, which never, I wouldn't say never works, but doesn't work for the majority of these guys. And testosterone really allows them to get to where they should have been all along, and then go through the process of putting their life together. And, it can kind of be like playing catch up a little bit, but I think when you've got a good roadmap and good guidance and good strategies and processes that you can go through to expedite that process, it can be a real awakening and kind of like a metamorphosis process where these guys can go through different, lifestyle practices or behavioral modifications, or, all these kind of different things that you can do to really cultivate and drive resilience and become, without sounding too cliche, become the best version of yourself possible, because you have the endocrine environment that you should have had that you've been lacking all along. So it, it's kind of like if there is a war on masculinity, this is basically picking up the sword. And, when guys look at testosterone or TRT as like cheating or anything like that, if I'm at war and there's a weapon on the ground, what, you think I'm not going to pick it up? Like, it's if we're at war, like if we're in a sword fight and there's a shotgun on the ground, I'm picking that thing up. And the idea of not picking it up being more fair is ridiculous. So I think men should be very proud of seeking out TRT. I don't think it's something that should be stigmatized. And it's been really great since 2019. Like when I started working in this field, people were like, what is TRT? What is a health coach? What is all of this stuff? It was something that no one had ever heard of. Whereas now TRT, particularly in the US, has become like a household term. Like most people are familiar with it. It's been amazing to see more awareness grow, and it's been amazing to see the stigma slowly dying off. And I think in the coming years, it's going to be even more mainstream. And I think that's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, even my guys, like in 2022 was whenever I first started seeing my own patients. It was almost secretive. They didn't want people to know. They didn't tell anybody. Now I get much more, word of mouth referrals and everything, because now it's much more open. A guy can go to another guy and be like, look, what you're telling me is what I felt 6 months ago. I've started on testosterone and I feel amazing. One of the other things I just kind of want your thoughts on, and I don't think anybody has this info. It's just not, this is looking forward, but like, whenever I started my clinic, I thought my population was going to be like 50 to 70, and that was going to be my bulk of testosterone replacement for guys. But man, I'm getting legitimate, documented hypogonadal guys in their young 30s, their 20s. And so just kind of the epigenetic potential, like what are the offspring going to look like from a person with a 250 testosterone and compared with, the previous 700. We're already getting declining sperm counts and everything, but do you have any insight what your prediction would be this is going to impact our future generations?
Yeah, not good. I think it's scary. I think it is. I think that, my generation, so I was born in 92, and I often, joke with people that my generation are the outcome of what happens when, you wrap everyone in plastic and you massively alter the diet to remove a lot of the micronutrition content, and then those people reproduce. And, looking at the next generation in terms of now my generation reproducing under a lot of these circumstances as well, I mean, it's just going to be the same thing that we're seeing in my generation, but compounded and multiplied. And I think that that is a very scary thing in terms of, these poor young souls being, born into vessels which are broken in kind of fundamental ways biologically. And I hope, and I'm optimistic about it because I don't like to be nihilistic, but I'm optimistic that our generation's shifting focus into longevity and health prevention and all of the things that have come out in the last few years, and a big shift in people's disposition towards wanting to focus on health and longevity. I would hope that that is going to trickle down into the younger generation so that there is more of a focus on fighting back or undoing some of this damage that's being done. So I think without intervention, it's scary, but I also think that humans are pragmatic and humans are strategic problem solvers. And, people like us will continue to spearhead this revolution of wanting the world to be a better place for everyone in it.